Los Angeles, January 13th, 1972. The air inside the new Temple Missionary Baptist Church was not just hot, it was suffocating. The humidity was so thick that it curled the pages of the hymnals in the pews, and the smell of melting hairspray mixed with the electric tang of overheated amplifiers. In the center of the room, bathed in a single harsh spotlight, stood a woman wearing a silver-sequined caftan that weighed nearly 20 pounds. She was sweating, her eyes were closed, and her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a terrifying accumulation of power that was about to be released. In the back row, a man named Robert Vance sat with a notepad, his pen hovering like a vulture, waiting for the Queen of Soul to finally crack under the pressure. He had already written the headline of his article, "The Fall of the Queen, When Soul Becomes Business." But he was wrong. By the time the next 4 minutes were over, Robert Vance would drop his pen, the choir would be weeping openly, and history would be rewritten. What happened in that church wasn't just a concert, it was an exorcism of doubt, a masterclass in leadership, and a secret act of salvation that no one in the audience knew about until decades later. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. To understand why that night in 1972 was so dangerous, we have to go back 6 months earlier to a rainy Tuesday in Detroit. The music industry was shifting. The raw, gritty soul of the 60s was being polished into disco and funk, and the critics were becoming vicious. Leading the pack was Robert Vance, a senior music critic for a major syndicated column. Vance was intelligent, sharp, and utterly cynical. He didn't view music as ministry, he viewed it as mathematics. To him, Aretha Franklin was a commodity that was peaking in value and was about to decline. He had spent the last year writing subtle, stinging op-eds suggesting that Aretha had lost her roots, that she had become too Hollywood, too removed from the pain that made her voice matter. "She sings from the wallet now, not the gut," Vance had written in a scathing review of her latest tour. Aretha read every word. She never responded publicly. She was too disciplined for that. But in private, the words cut deep. She sat in her living room in Detroit, the newspaper spread out on the mahogany table, silence filling the large house. She was the queen, yes, but heavy is the head that wears the crown. She felt a disconnect, not from the music, but from the purity of where it started. She needed to go back to the source. She needed the church. But returning to the church wasn't simple. It meant facing the judgment of the elders, the expectations of the congregation, and the terrifying possibility that Vance was right, that she had forgotten how to summon the Holy Ghost. It was during this period of internal crisis that Aretha found herself driving through the rain-slicked streets of Detroit's joyless, distinct, far away from the glitz of the recording studios. She wasn't looking for attention. She was looking for a sound. She had heard rumors of a young organist named Marcus Thorne, a 22-year-old prodigy who played at a dilapidated storefront church on 12th Street. They said he played like he was fighting for his life. When Aretha's black sedan pulled up to the curb, the neighborhood was quiet. The windows of the Grace and Mercy Chapel were taped over with cardboard. Inside, Marcus Thorne was sitting at a battered Hammond B3 organ. He wasn't playing a hymn. He was staring at a pile of eviction notices on the music stand. The church was 3 months behind on rent. The pastor had already left. The congregation had dwindled to a handful of elderly women who couldn't afford to keep the heat on. Marcus had a choice to make: sell the Hammond organ to pay off the immediate debt and close the church, or wait for a miracle that wasn't coming. He ran his hand over the wooden keys. This instrument was the only thing that made sense to him in a world that seemed intent on crushing him. The door at the back of the church creaked open. Marcus didn't turn around. "We're closed," he called out, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Service isn't until Sunday if we're still here." "I didn't come for service," a voice said from the shadows. It was a voice that sounded like warm honey and gravel. "I came to hear if the rumors are true." Marcus turned. The woman standing in the doorway wore a rain trench coat and a scarf over her head, big dark glasses obscuring her eyes. But there was no mistaking the posture. It was the stance of someone who commanded rooms without speaking. She walked down the center aisle, the sound of her heels echoing in the empty space. She stopped 5 feet from the organ. "They say you can make this thing talk," she said, nodding at the Hammond. "But right now, it looks like you're saying goodbye to it." Marcus swallowed hard. He recognized her now, despite the glasses. The shock paralyzed him for a second. Ms. Franklin?" "Just Aretha, baby," she said, taking off the glasses. Her eyes were tired, but they held a piercing intensity. "Play me something. Not a performance. Play me what you're feeling right now." Marcus looked at his hands. They were shaking. He thought about the eviction notice, the silence of God, the cold in the room. He pressed down on the keys. He didn't play a standard gospel progression. He played a dissonant, minor-key chord that swelled into a cry. He poured his frustration into the instrument. For 5 minutes, he played without looking up. When he finished, the final note hung in the freezing air, vibrating against the peeling paint of the walls. Aretha stood silent for a long time. This is the kind of moment where most people would clap or offer a compliment. But Aretha Franklin was a musical architect, and she heard something else. "You're angry," she said softly, "and you're scared. That's good. But you're rushing the resolve. You're trying to get to the happy ending before you've earned it in the melody." She walked up the steps to the pulpit and sat on the bench next to him. It was a surreal image, the international superstar and the broke choir director sitting side by side in a freezing church. "Move over," she commanded gently. She placed her hands on the keys. "When you're in the valley, Marcus, you don't run up the hill. You walk through it. Like this." She played the same chord progression Marcus had played, but she slowed it down. She added space between the notes. She let the silence speak as loudly as the sound. It wasn't just a music lesson, it was a leadership lesson. She was showing him that you don't hide from the pain. You control it. You guide it. You make it work for you. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I have a critic named Robert Vance who thinks I've forgotten this," she said, gesturing to the empty pews. "And I need to know if he's right. And you need to keep this church open." She reached into her purse. Marcus braced himself for a handout, a check that would solve his problems. But Aretha didn't pull out a checkbook. She pulled out a sheet of paper with dates on it. "I'm recording a live album in Los Angeles in January. Amazing Grace. I have the greatest choir in the world, James Cleveland's choir. But I need a second ear, someone who isn't afraid of the dark. I want you to come as my apprentice arranger." Marcus stared at her. "I can't leave. If I don't pay the landlord by Friday, they take the keys. They take the organ." "If you take the job," Aretha said, her voice turning strictly business. "The advance will cover your rent for a year. But I don't pay for charity, Marcus. I pay for excellence. If you come with me, you don't just watch. You work. And if you can't handle the pressure, I'll send you back to Detroit before the first reel spins. Do we have a deal?" This was the leadership style of Aretha Franklin. She didn't just rescue people. She empowered them. But she demanded they rise to the occasion. She offered him a lifeline, but he had to be the one to climb it. If you enjoy hearing about how legends build their legacy through others, make sure to subscribe for new stories so you never miss a beat of these hidden histories. Marcus took the deal. Fast forward to January, Los Angeles. The new Temple Missionary Baptist Church was being prepped for the live recording. The atmosphere was chaotic. Warner Brothers had sent a film crew, led by Sidney Pollack, to document the event. Cables snaked across the floor like black vipers, and in the middle of it all was Robert Vance. Vance had flown in from New York, convinced that this gospel experiment would be a disaster. He was telling anyone who would listen that Aretha was desperate. "She's retreating," Vance told a colleague outside the church. "She can't compete on the pop charts anymore, so she's running back to the safety of the choir. It's a nostalgia act." Inside the church, Marcus was terrified. He was 22, surrounded by legends. The Reverend James Cleveland, a giant of a man with a voice like a thunderstorm, was directing the choir. The musicians were the best in the world. Marcus felt small. He felt like a fraud. He stood in the corner, holding Aretha's score sheets, his hands sweating. Aretha was in the vestry, preparing. She was nervous, terrified actually. This wasn't a studio where she could do 20 takes. This was live. This was in front of God and the congregation. If she failed here, Vance would be right. Her legacy would be tarnished. She looked in the mirror and saw the fear in her own eyes. She needed to ground herself. She called for Marcus. "Where is the boy from Detroit?" she snapped at her assistant. Marcus was ushered into the small, crowded room. Aretha looked at him. "You're shaking," she said. "I don't belong here, Ms. Franklin," Marcus confessed, his voice trembling. "Look at these people. Look at Reverend Cleveland. I'm just a kid from a storefront church." Aretha stood up. She towered over him, not in height, but in presence. "You think I'm not scared?" she whispered, leaning in close so the others wouldn't hear. "Robert Vance is out there with a pen that cuts deeper than a knife. Half the people in this room think I've sold out. But fear is fuel, Marcus. You don't get rid of it. You burn it." She handed him a piece of sheet music. It was a simplified arrangement of Holy, Holy. "During the bridge," she said, "James is going to take the choir high. I need you to signal the rhythm section to drop out, just the organ, just the bass. I need that empty space we found in Detroit. Can you do that?" "Me? Signal the band?" Marcus's eyes went wide. "But the musical director?" "I'm the queen," Aretha said, a small, defiant smile touching her lips. "And I'm telling you to do it. Leading isn't about being the loudest, Marcus. It's about knowing when to be quiet. Show them the silence." The recording began. The heat in the church rose. The choir started singing, and the energy was electric. Aretha walked out, and the congregation erupted. But Robert Vance sat unmoved in the back, arms crossed, analyzing every breath. He noted that her voice was slightly raspy in the opening number. He scribbled, struggling to find the pocket. He was writing the narrative of her failure in real time. Then came the moment. Holy, holy. The song built up, a mountain of sound, the choir screaming toward the heavens. The energy was frantic, almost overwhelming. It was becoming a wall of noise. Aretha looked back at the band. She looked at Marcus, who was standing near the organist, Ken Lupper. Marcus froze. The moment was rushing past him. "Don't run up the hill," Aretha's voice echoed in his head. "Walk through it." Marcus stepped forward. He caught the eye of the drummer, Bernard Purdy, and slashed his hand across the air, the universal signal for cut. It was a bold, almost insane move for an unknown assistant to make. But Purdy, seeing the conviction in the boy's eyes, dropped the beat. The bass player pulled back. The music didn't stop, but the floor fell out from under it. Suddenly, it was just Aretha's voice, suspended over a soft, trembling organ pad. The sudden drop in volume was shocking. It created a vacuum in the room that sucked the breath out of everyone. Aretha didn't miss a beat. She stepped into that silence and delivered a run of notes so pure, so filled with centuries of pain and hope, that a woman in the front row fainted. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a spiritual transaction. In the back of the room, Robert Vance stopped writing. His pen hovered over the paper. He had been waiting for her to oversing, to show off. Instead, she had pulled back. She had shown restraint, and in that restraint, she had found a power that terrified him. He looked up, and for the first time in years, he wasn't analyzing. He was feeling. The cynicism that he used as a shield was cracking. But the night wasn't over. The true test was still ahead. During the intermission, chaos broke out backstage. The film director, Sidney Pollack, was arguing with the sound engineers. They were missing the sync. The lights were melting the gels. The choir was exhausted. Tensions were snapping. Aretha retreated to a corner, drinking water with honey. She looked at Marcus. "You did good," she said. "But now comes the hard part. Amazing Grace. It's 10 minutes long. I'm going to go places in this song I haven't been in 20 years. I might get lost." "You won't," Marcus said, surprising himself with his confidence. "If I do," Aretha said, looking him dead in the eye. "You don't follow me with the music. You hold the root. You keep me tethered to the earth so I can fly. Understand? This is a vital lesson for anyone who wants to understand leadership. A great leader knows they need a team to ground them. They know that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's a mechanism for trust. If you are finding value in this journey of resilience, please take a second to subscribe for new stories. It helps us bring more of these hidden moments to light. The second set began. The opening notes of Amazing Grace floated out. Aretha started singing. It was slow, agonizingly slow. She took the word amazing and stretched it, bent it, broke it, and put it back together. She was weeping. The choir was weeping. And then it happened. Overcome with emotion, Aretha stopped singing for a split second, her head thrown back, caught in the spirit. The rhythm section wobbled. The momentum threatened to collapse into a messy halt. Marcus saw it. He saw the bassist hesitate, unsure if she was stopping or pausing. Marcus didn't look at Aretha. He looked at the bassist and nodded firmly, tapping his chest in a steady, slow pulse. 1, 2, 3. He became the metronome. He became the anchor. He held the root, just like she asked. The band locked back in. Aretha felt the ground steady beneath her feet. She opened her eyes, saw Marcus holding the rhythm with his entire body, and she launched into the final verse with a power that shook the stained glass windows. It was a primal scream of victory. At the back of the church, Robert Vance was no longer sitting. He was standing. He had dropped his notepad on the floor. There were tears streaming down his face. He wasn't a critic anymore. He was just a man, witnessing something divine. The narrative he had constructed of a washed-up pop star had been incinerated by the fire of that performance. When the song ended, there was silence for 3 seconds. Then, pandemonium. People were embracing, crying, shouting. It was the greatest recording in gospel history. Later that night, as the equipment was being packed up, Robert Vance approached Aretha. He looked smaller than usual. His arrogance was gone. "Ms. Franklin," he said, his voice thick, I have the review written in my head, but I don't think I have the vocabulary for what happened tonight." Aretha looked at him. She didn't gloat. She didn't offer a witty comeback. She just nodded. "The vocabulary isn't yours, Mr. Vance. It belongs to the Spirit. You just write down what you felt, not what you thought." She walked past him, towards the exit where Marcus was waiting. Marcus looked exhausted, but elated. "We did it," he said. "We did," Aretha smiled. She handed him an envelope. "This is your ticket back to Detroit, and the deed to the church building on 12th Street. It's paid off, in full." Marcus froze. "What? But the deal was just for the rent." "I told you," Aretha said, putting on her dark glasses. "I pay for excellence. You didn't just arrange the music, Marcus. You held the room. You led when I couldn't. That church is yours now. Run it. Teach them. And when you find a kid who plays like he's angry at the world, you show him how to walk through the valley." Marcus stood on the sidewalk of Los Angeles, holding the future of his community in his hands. He watched the limousine pull away. He realized then that Aretha hadn't just brought him there to help her record an album. She had brought him there to remind him who he was. The album Amazing Grace went on to become the best-selling live gospel album of all time. It sold over 2 million copies in the United States alone. It silenced the critics. Robert Vance wrote his review titled, "The Queen Returns to the Throne." In it, he admitted he was wrong. He wrote, "I went looking for a flaw and found a miracle." But the real miracle wasn't on the charts. It was on 12th Street in Detroit. The Grace and Mercy Church didn't close. Marcus Thorne became a legendary choir director in Detroit. He never became famous globally, but he taught thousands of children how to play, how to sing, and how to listen to the silence. Aretha Franklin continued to dominate the world stage, but she never forgot that rainy Tuesday. She proved that true leadership isn't about hoarding power. It's about knowing when to share it. She showed that even the strongest voices need an anchor. Years later, in an interview, someone asked Aretha what her favorite recording was. Everyone expected her to say, "Respect." Instead, she smiled a secret smile and said, "The one where I learned that grace isn't something you sing, it's something you give." But the story doesn't quite end there. There is one final twist that very few people know. In 2018, at Aretha Franklin's funeral in Detroit, the choir that sang behind the casket was massive, hundreds of voices strong. The director of that mass choir was an older man with gray hair and hands that still moved with a fierce, rhythmic precision. It was Marcus Thorne. Before the service began, a young reporter approached him. "You must have rehearsed for weeks for this," the reporter said. "The pressure must be immense." Marcus smiled, looking at the casket of the woman who had saved his life 40 years earlier. "There is no pressure," he said softly. "Aretha taught me a long time ago. We aren't here to perform. We're just here to hold the root so she can fly one last time." If you want to discover more incredible stories about the hidden acts of kindness behind music legends, subscribe for new stories right now. As the service ended and the hearse drove away, Marcus sat at the piano one last time. He played a simple, slow chord progression, the one with the space in the middle, the one she had taught him. And in that silence, if you listened closely, you could hear the sound of a debt being paid, not with money, but with a lifetime of music. This story reminds us that we never truly know the weight someone is carrying or the power we have to lift it. Aretha Franklin wasn't just a voice. She was a vessel, and in saving one small church in Detroit, she ensured that her song would never truly end. Before you go, subscribe for new stories, like this video, and let me know in the comments. Who is another artist whose leadership inspires you? The music fades, but the legacy remains. Thank you for watching.